I've seen the term Golden Age Minecraft floating around a fair bit recently. I've seen it in mod packs that aim to dredge up a version of Minecraft from the alternate timeline where Beta 1.8 never happened. I've seen it in the dreary, nostalgic compilations of old Minecraft screenshots set to slowed down C418 songs. I mean, I've even seen a whole subreddit dedicated to preserving and discussing this so-called Golden Age. Posted there are videos and comment threads exploring forgotten mods, lost versions, and beloved Let's Play series. Each topic pines for ancient history, for the time when Minecraft felt new and exciting and unknown. But amidst all this talk of Golden Age ephemera, I think one aspect gets criminally under-discussed: custom maps. People post requests for old custom maps and respond with archives full of them, of course, but I hardly ever see anyone dive deeper. When I think back on my playtime in the Golden Age, memories of jumping puzzles, exposition-filled signs, crazy minecart boosters, and treasure hidden behind clay blocks come rushing in. It felt like there was an entire universe of games and little worlds made by players like me out there. But it also felt like there were a lot of features that tied them together through time and space. And the more I think back on it, the more I realize that the history of custom maps in the Golden Age is the history of the Golden Age writ small. So I want to take a look back at these old custom maps and see what made them tick. What features did they have in common, if at all? Where did those common features come from? How did they catch on and evolve as Minecraft did? And was the Golden Age of Minecraft also the Golden Age of Minecraft custom maps? We'll explore all of that, but first we gotta lay down some groundwork. Like, when exactly was the Golden Age? Depends on who you ask, I guess, but the subreddit considers any version of the game from its first public release in 2009 to release version 1.2.5 in 2012 to be of the Golden Age. That makes some sense. Minecraft experienced a lot of growth, both in terms of features and popularity around that time. It also seems to me that most people who play Minecraft now are kids who are just discovering it and get to do a little cultural archaeology, or they're 20-somethings like me who want to reminisce about those heady days of yore. But why stop the timeline at release version 1.2.5? Was release 1.3 that bad? I mean, did the jungle temples kill the mystique of the game? Was villager trading just one mechanic too many? Honestly, it might just be the Golden Apple changes that ushered in the end of the Golden Age. Like, I remember that really upset me at the time, for some reason. If you ask me, 1.2.5 doesn't make that much sense as an end date. In fact, I'd slim the scope of the Golden Age down a bit. I think it started in Alpha 1.0 and ended in Beta 1.7.3. This period still covers a lot of the game's growth, in fact I would argue some of its most significant growth, but this smaller Golden Age additionally carves out Beta 1.8, which officially did away with that lovely old Beta world generation and made the incredibly misguided, if not outright evil decision to introduce hunger mechanics. Most importantly, this was the period I started playing in and remember most fondly, and this is my video, so, this is the time period we'll stick with. Also, when I talk about custom maps in this video, I'm talking about maps made by Minecraft players and posted onto forums solely for the enjoyment of other Minecraft players. Maps that, at the very least, grasped at game design. I'm not talking about, historical server maps or the Let's Play worlds of big YouTubers. Those kinds of maps are fun to look back on, but I think they just served fundamentally different purposes from the custom maps we'll be looking at. Unless, of course, they were reworked into proper custom maps, which happened quite a bit, actually. Finally, if you're curious about what map I'm playing at any given time, keep your eye on the upper left corner of the screen. I've put the name of the map and the map's creator up there for you, if I know who the creator is. I found a few uncredited maps, so if you know who made them, please leave a comment. And hey, while we're on the topic of comments, If I missed a map that you love and you want it to be a part of this fledgling history, or you just want to start beef with me for not including it, go ahead and leave a comment about that too. We love engagement, folks. Without further ado, let's dive in. If we want to understand the shape and the form and the conventions of Golden Age custom maps, we need to trace them up from their roots. That brings us to what some might call the classic or pre-alpha era, a time before HP existed, before the iconic creeper existed, hell, before custom maps as we know them could have even existed. So let's go back to the source, the independent games source. TIGSource is a hub for indie game developers and enthusiasts to share industry news, offer technical support, and playtest each other's games. It was also the site where, on May 17, 2009, developer Marcus Notch Persson first publicly posted Minecraft. At first, the game was bare bones, more of a toy than anything. Players would drop into a small world made from grass, dirt, and stone. A world where you could walk anywhere, break anything, build anything, with the 5 blocks that were available to you, anyway. And this is how the game stayed for most of the classic era. It was a simple cyber sandbox. Despite its early limitations, a custom map community began to coalesce in Minecraft's TIGSource forum thread almost immediately. Of course, there was no way to share save files yet, so people shared screenshots and video tours of their worlds at first. But they really wanted file sharing. In fact, they wanted more than that. Forum user TerrorBuns even suggested a future for Minecraft wherein players could create whole levels, or indeed whole mini-games, in a resourceless builder mode. They could then distribute those levels to the community who would play them with a special, constrained set of rules, such as being unable to break or place blocks. Dubbed Dungeon Mode, this imagined set of rules received Notch's approval, and though nothing resembling it would be added to the game for a few years, Dungeon Mode would become the blueprint for custom maps in the Golden Age. Resourceless Builder Mode was first on the docket though, and now you might have wondered why someone would suggest that for a game which, at the time, gave the player limitless resources. But see, from the game's conception, Notch envisioned it as a survival game, and he said as much in the first few hours of its public existence. It only took a few months for that vision to become a reality when, in September of 2009, the resource collecting survival mode became the only way to play Minecraft, through the paid client, anyway. So a resourceless builder mode was always going to be necessary for dungeon mode maps to exist. And without official support from Mojang, at least for the time being, the community had to build it on their own. And as it turns out, the history of Minecraft's earliest custom maps is also the history of its earliest mods. There were NBT Edit and its successor InvEdit, of course, tools that granted players free reign over the contents of their inventory. Regardless of what third-party program was used, the ability to cheat any item or block, in infinite amounts potentially, allowed map makers to essentially go resourceless again. For the builder part of resourceless builder mode though, map makers had Omen, a Minecraft map editor. Developed by Osichi, this tool could alter a level's world height and world size, replace blocks, generate new terrain, change the color of the clouds, import 2D images, and so much more. Omen was, at least in part, responsible for many of the first custom maps. If you trawl the annals of the Minecraft forum's modding board, you'll find less tech-savvy players requesting mountainous maps, maps surrounded by lava, and entirely flat maps made of only grass. These requests were fulfilled almost entirely by other users who knew how to work Omen. One of the oldest still playable custom maps was not a request though. Water Climb, by forum user Rosetta, was a towering bedrock silo populated with twisting tentacles of water, each flanked by lethal lines of lava. The goal was to swim to the end of this serpentine obstacle course without touching the lava or falling to the ground. Now, with no HP to zap away if the player did touch the lava and no command blocks to force them back to the start, it was just kind of on the honor system that you'd restart if you screwed up. Without any hard-coded mechanical ways to enforce a custom map's rules, this honor system style of rules would become the de facto rule set for virtually all custom maps in the Golden Age. Map makers just had to trust players to trust the intended experience. As we explore Golden Age custom maps, you'll notice just how much of that era's map-making philosophy was laid down here in the Classic era. From the use of honor system style rules, to the reliance on third-party tools, to perhaps even the fascination with parkour or jumping puzzles. It's hard to ascribe anything more specific than that to these ancient maps, because hardly anything more specific really exists anymore. In the decade-plus span of time between Minecraft's release and now, that TIG-source thread, the Minecraft forums, the Museum of Minecraft, and other sites of custom map congregation have become graveyards, overflowing with rotten links to dead domains and 404 pages. All that remains is what lived on through the Golden Age. Luckily for us, the arrival of the Golden Age happens to coincide with the advent of Minecraft-specific forums, and with those forums came custom map boards. For the first time ever, custom maps could all be displayed in their own spaces, without any other kind of post to distract from them. These custom map silos allowed the community to grow even further, and to more easily cross-pollinate their ideas. It also allowed them to sort their creations as they saw fit, to collectively develop genres in their newly flourishing medium. Since Planet Minecraft's custom map board mostly dedicated itself to showcase maps and schematics, this genre sorting was most prominent on the Minecraft forums. Here, mapmakers denoted their genres with tags, which suggested how their map would play out, be it a mini-game, a showcase, a series of puzzles, or a survival challenge. Now, admittedly, there wasn't much to mechanically differentiate these custom maps from one another. How could there have been? Every custom map was built and played in survival mode. There was just no way to prevent a player of a custom map from griefing their way through it like an ingrate. And, you don't want anyone ruining your hard work, or their own experience. So most maps looked backwards towards the TIG-source forums for guidance and implemented dungeon mode. Not with a mod or anything, since that would have raised the barrier of entry on development and play, but through a set of honor code enforced norms. But what does that look like? Well, mapmakers generally greeted players with a wall of signs when they spawned in, ordering them to play on a certain difficulty and to refrain from breaking or placing blocks, crafting items, or using cheats. And then they just had to trust that players would honor those rules for their own good. The specifics of dungeon mode changed from map to map depending on the creator's desired experience. Most maps specified a block you could break, for example, but those core rules spanned the spectrum of custom map genres. And they were initially laid out by the adventure map. The forum never provided an official definition for what constituted an adventure map, or any other kind of custom map, for that matter. Many adventure maps borrowed elements from, or even copied wholesale, adventure games like The Legend of Zelda and Portal, or RPGs like Oblivion and Elden Ring. Wait, what? Is that the Stormhill Shack? And there's the Mistwood, and turns out that was unrelated to Elden Ring and was never finished. Anyway, users of the forum seem to have decided that it means, at a minimum, a map with a story. The first self-labeled adventure map was The Labyrinth, posted in August of 2010 by then forum user and now popular Hollow Knight speedrunner, Fireborn. In the Labyrinth, the player awakens in the eponymous Labyrinth, and must overcome a series of challenges to escape. Now, that might barely qualify as a story, but it's one you'll see replicated a ton in this early era. In fact, you can find a lot of the DNA of Golden Age custom maps on display here. Other features of note include the chests of starting equipment, which, in their overabundance, reveal just how much of an adventure map's experience hinged on trusting players not to easily cheat themselves out of a good time. There's also the checkpoint system, a Herculean feat of infrastructure that links every far-flung corner of the map back to its spawn point through a web of minecart rails. And of course, most of the challenges put in front of you are movement-based challenges. This map branches out and explores every possible mutation of Minecraft's traversal mechanics. Within the labyrinth's bedrock walls, you could find cactus jumps, a Rosetta-esque water climb segment, boat elevators, and even ice golfing, which would evolve into an entire subgenre of map on its own. Now, I don't bring up any of these features because the Labyrinth was the first custom map to do any of them, per se. I mean, it very well could have had the first chest of starting equipment, the first checkpoint system, the first cactus jump in any custom map, but those things easily could have been accomplished in the classic era, in maps that we can no longer access. No, I bring up these elements because they're ubiquitous in the Golden Age, and we can trace them at least as far back as the Labyrinth. Around this time, another soon-to-be influential adventure map dropped, the Four Towers. The concept was pretty straightforward. You awaken in a dank old dungeon in a dank old tower in a dank old prison complex from which you must escape. The standard dungeon mode rules apply. Play on easy, don't cheat, don't place blocks, and don't break blocks. Except, the sign in your cell tells you that, to bust out of there, you must dig at the bluish soft spot in the stone. Of course, you have to suspend your disbelief somewhat because it's not actually some kind of soft stone block modded into the game. It's clay. The map tells you that you can, and should, break that. Custom maps before and after the Four Towers had certain special blocks you could break to reveal secrets and shortcuts. But from the Four Towers onwards, that block became clay almost by default. The idea of clay as the breakable block became so widely used by map makers that some didn't even write this clay exception into their rules. They just assumed that when players saw clay blocks, they would break them. And it makes sense that clay would become the universally breakable block. Default textures allowed it to stealth against the stone, making it perfect for covering secret treasures. It could be broken quickly and reliably without tools, meaning map makers didn't have to risk giving a pickaxe to a potential cheater. And when broken, it dropped a bunch of clay balls instead of a block, putting just enough extra effort between that potential cheater and an easy shortcut. Now, I couldn't find a working copy of the original version of this map for reasons we'll talk about later, and that's a bummer. But the newer versions of this map come with an extra treat, a custom texture pack. Texture packs had been a thing since Minecraft's very earliest days, but no custom map required a custom texture pack to work until the 2010 release of a scale model recreation of the original USS Enterprise. Worth noting here is that this custom map donned the creation tag on the Minecraft forums. These showcase maps, as we'll call them, basically acted as big walkable art installations. Someone would build a massive city, a sculpture, a piece of pop culture, or a marvelous machine and just upload it as is. No rules, no goals, just walk around and soak it in. Anyway, the USS Enterprise's custom texture pack kept some of Minecraft's original textures. A player would recognize the gray exterior of the Enterprise's stone, for example, but it swapped the rest of the fantasy-adjacent textures for some 16x16 sci-fi goodness. Look at those glass doors. check out those metal panels. And these handsome captains. The idea of having a texture pack for your custom map would not be contained in the blocky halls of the Enterprise for long, though. The idea blasted off from its niche and trekked across map genres, inspiring a veritable galaxy of imitators. Tricking out your custom map with a texture pack of your own design yielded some obvious benefits. For starters, it allowed map makers to redefine the meaning of Minecraft's assets to suit the map's aesthetic or narrative needs. Doing a high fantasy map? A dark fantasy map? Maybe you're just looking for a more vibrant color palette. The rise of customizable texture packs like the Gyaradoku pack or Rodox's legendary Painterly pack made this kind of vibe refinement easy and accessible even to map makers with no pixel art skills to speak of. In fact, you'd specifically see some version of the Painterly pack in many custom maps around this time. Most famously, perhaps, in Chronobasher's classic map, Professor Griswold and the Curse of the Pyramid. Released in November of 2011, this adventure map puts players in the shoes of amateur archaeologists under the tutelage of the legendary Professor Griswold as he searches for lost treasure beneath the eponymous pyramid. The Painterly pack is mostly here because it looks nice, I think. Its warm palette and bold shapes make the overworld feel more inviting to explore. Its chiseled hieroglyphs and elaborate tools make delving into the underground feel like an archaeological dig. But I think the real reason that Chronobasher needed the Painterly pack here is that its leather armor turns the player into Indiana Jones, and that's just essential for any archaeology map, really. A custom texture pack wasn't the only extra treat hiding out in Professor Griswold's zip file, though. See, up to this point, the written content for adventure maps, the rules text, exposition, NPC dialogue, and so on and so forth, had been delivered almost exclusively through in-game signs. When the text being conveyed was particularly long, and rules text was always long, it would get smeared across several different signs, sometimes over several different walls. With the text taking up so much physical space and with no unified way of laying that text out, reading could be a hassle. But Professor Griswold, as far as I can tell, was the first custom map to ditch this model. It replaced the literal walls of text with single signs that simply suggested the player read note 1, and so on. The player would then tab out, find the corresponding notepad document in the zip file, and let the information flow through them. This elegant little solution to the sign problem had its own issues, namely that having to tab out of Minecraft whenever you needed to progress the map's story just ground everything to a screeching halt. But this method worked well enough to be adopted by several custom maps. Until the introduction of the map in Beta 1.6, that is. These map items worked pretty much the same way they do now. The moment you opened one, it would display a pixelated overhead view of the surrounding area. By way of third-party programs, however, map creators could manipulate these map items to display the rules, exposition, and dialogue of their custom maps. Like the old walls of text, these map notes allowed the player to get information about the custom map and its narrative while tabbed into the game. And like the less old external text documents, these map notes didn't clutter the custom map's architecture nor inflict psychic damage upon the reader. These map items and the third-party programs that sustained them synthesized the best bits of both old approaches and almost entirely superseded them by the time the game fully released. Beta 1.6 wasn't done outmoding custom map conventions yet. You see, it also fixed a minecart-related bug that had been harnessed by players and map makers alike, basically since minecarts were added. Back then, the only two ways to accelerate a minecart were to let gravity send it flying, or to let a crappy little powered minecart inch it along the track. To enjoy minecarts at all, you either had to have a mostly downhill and likely one-way track, or be a very, very patient coal baron. That is, until players discovered that pesky little bug back in Alpha 1.0.14. In simple terms, the bug made it so that when a minecart touched another minecart moving in the same direction, both carts would start to accelerate rapidly. Now, it probably goes without saying that this was a huge deal for basically anyone interested in making a minecart track. Immediately, Minecraft engineers began taming it, trying to find the most compact, cost-effective way to wield the bug as a booster. Different designs flourished early on, from this funky donut-shaped booster to this insane diagonal cannon booster, but they were flawed. If left to accelerate on their own for long enough, the acceleration value would be reset to 0, causing the minecart to stop dead in its tracks. On the first day of August in 2010, however, the player Lightfox posted their 2-cart booster design to YouTube and revolutionized minecart boosters. If you're an old head like me, you almost certainly recognize the design, and probably built it in your own worlds once upon a time. This Hot Wheels booster, named for its resemblance to Hot Wheels tracks, was small, simple, and scalable. And it reset itself. For its time, this booster was basically perfect. If you played any given custom map from before Beta 1.6 and it had a sizable rail system in it, you'd likely find Lightfox's booster, or some variation of it, sitting at the track, waiting to send you off. The death of the bugged boosters came in 2 blows. First, the addition of powered rails in Beta 1.5. These special rails condensed into one block what bugged boosters needed several to accomplish. When powered by redstone, they would instantly accelerate a cart to top speed. And though these new powered rails would be the norm for minecart tracks from here on out, existing boosters still worked. They didn't need to be replaced by powered rails. Until Beta 1.6 patched the booster bug out anyway. Like rotting links on Minecraft forum posts, any instance of an old booster simply ceased to function. With each passing update and squashing of a bug, Mojang brought survival multiplayer, or SMP, closer and closer to parity with the single-player experience. It just became like playing Minecraft with your friends, and because that was, and still is, so much more fun than playing alone, more people experienced Minecraft almost exclusively as a co-op game. Custom maps started to prepare for the possibility of co-op by outfitting checkpoints with multiple sets of loot and multiple beds for resetting spawn points. Maps like It's Better Together even started to be designed specifically for co-op. And while this communal shift towards SMP was all fun and good, it dragged a persistent and usually invisible bug into the daylight. Basically, when a single-player map was loaded onto a multiplayer server, players would spawn on the highest valid block above the map's spawn point. As you can imagine, this could make playing custom maps with friends very confusing. Like, you expect to find the entrance to a map when you boot it up, but instead you're greeted with an exterior view of the cobblestone shell holding the map. I can't find any documentation on this specific bug, so I don't know quite why it happened, but I know how map makers worked around it. They just sort of built a room above the spawn point. These multiplayer spawn rooms were usually furnished to match their utilitarian purpose, which is to say, they were barely furnished at all. There'd be like a hole in the ground and a sign next to it that said, "Enter here," and that was it. Some maps, like the Monarch of Madness though, elevated their spawn room into a spawn lobby, a place full of fun little activities to do with your friends while you waited for everyone to get the LogMe and Hamachi IP figured out. Okay, I've been putting it off for long enough. It's finally time to talk about survival maps. They are custom maps, played in survival mode, without a narrative, where the goal is to, well, survive in unusual circumstances. circumstances which often, but not always, restrict the amount and variety of resources available to the player. At one end of the challenge spectrum that these maps developed upon, you had maps purely about surviving in a weird or interesting setting. And the first survival map posted to the Minecraft forums fell squarely on this end. Posted in September of 2010, Skylands was, as the name suggested, a map that had the player survive on a series of floating islands above the void. Though it was all custom terrain generation, it's not hard to draw comparisons between the world of Skylands and the floating worlds of Minecraft's in-dev version. The only difference is, Ieru filled the map with dungeons and treasure houses and little secrets to find, which makes it feel more like a free-form adventure map than anything. A few months later, in December of 2010, forum user Ashian released Survival Island. Despite its relatively terrestrial setting, just a sandy desert island in the middle of a basically endless ocean, this map was significantly more challenging than its high-flying contemporary. See, Survival Island was only seeded with a handful of grass blocks, which at the time meant it was going to be very hard to make the armor and food you needed to survive. Nowadays you can cultivate a pretty robust vegetarian diet with like 2 grass blocks and some bone meal. But for most of the Golden Age, the only reliable sources of food in survival mode were bread, fish, mushroom stew, and pork chops. The latter of which was by far the most available and most nutritious option. That was because, unlike in modern Minecraft, animals in the Golden Age spawned aggressively on certain illuminated grass blocks, effectively granting the player an infinite supply of pork chops for healing and leather for armor. For this reason, you'd be hard-pressed to find even a single grass block in any survival map that followed this. So, armed only with their fists, a single tree, and an empty stomach, players had to survive on the island while completing a checklist of tasks like build a 2-story house with bookshelves and a fireplace, start a cactus farm, etc., etc. Now, you might be wondering how on earth players were supposed to complete these challenges with only a handful of sand and 5 logs, but rest assured, Survival Island pulled the Skylands and populated its underground with dungeons and secret treasures to make those tasks accomplishable. And in so doing, it kind of established a convention of the survival map genre, progression-gated rewards. What I mean is that the map hands out rewards that make survival easier, but in places the player can only access once they've hit certain milestones. If you want to get to the chests in the dungeon underneath the island, you need the pickaxe to mine down that far, and of course a sword or a bow for dispatching all the baddies in the dark down there. If you want to get the treasure stash on that floating island, you need to have enough blocks to bridge over to it in the first place. With the double whammy release of Skylands and Survival Island, these progression-gated rewards became a staple of survival maps to come. This convention would perhaps be most noticeable on the very furthest edge of the challenge spectrum, a place where players were forced to survive in the most challenging, rage-quit-inducing conditions possible. The super hostile end of the spectrum, if you will. Early in March of 2011, the now renowned mapmaker Vex released The Sea of Flame. Now, I'm sure you couldn't guess by the name, but the Sea of Flame forced players to survive on a desolate island in the middle of an ocean of lava. Sound miserable? 'Cause it is. And it's made even more so by the inclusion of devilish traps, lurking just behind every single sliver of hope, like an anglerfish behind its lure. But this superbly sinister masterstroke of sadism was only the first installment of Vex's Super Hostile series. A series which embodied an ethos emblazoned on a sign in that first installment. This map is hard, I hate you, and want you to die. Later installments only continued to innovate on their particular brand of evil, culminating in an innovation so big it spawned an entire genre of custom maps that remains popular to this day. Super Kaizo Caverns, a name that referenced the infamously and unfairly hard Super Mario World ROM hack Kaizo Mario World, was released just a few weeks after the Sea of Flame. As the fourth installment of the Super Hostile series, it was standard Super Hostile fare at that point. Terrain that wants to kill you, traps that want to kill you, and a lack of resources that made it easier for the terrain and traps to kill you. The one major difference, that huge innovation, was that the goal now wasn't just to simply survive, it was to complete the Victory Monument. To accomplish this task, players had to gather at least one wool block of every color, one mineral block of every type, and plonk them down into their designated spaces on this magnificent glass altar. The Victory Monument was a wildly successful addition. It would reappear in every subsequent Super Hostile map, and it even served as the basis for the entire genre of Capture the Wool survival maps, which, as I mentioned before, are still popular to this day. As beloved as this style of survival map was, and still is, it isn't nearly as enduring as the most well-known survival map of the Golden Age, Noob Crew's Skyblock Survival. Now, you might be surprised to hear me mention that map in a video where I started off by saying I wasn't going to talk about anything past beta 1.7.3, but I'm still not. Although Noob Crew's map didn't take off until well after the Golden Age, it had been kicking around for a while before then. I think, in a lot of ways, Skyblock is the apotheosis of survival maps, a perfect blend of whimsical locale and hardcore challenge. Harkening back to Skylands, the first of the survival maps, Skyblock places the player on a little island in the void. Like Survival Island before it, Skyblock only doles out a few paltry resources, including grass blocks. And like the Super Hostile series, one wrong step will kill the player. As well, it has a checklist of tasks to complete, something that seems all the more extreme given the nothing surrounding the player. From that nothing, they're expected to expand the island, build the library, go to the Nether, get every color of wool, and so much more. And the thing is, you're given exactly everything you need to clear that list right from the start, in the chest, in the ground, and in the tree. In order to start the work, though, you need to overclock your planning skills and game knowledge immediately. From the moment you load the map, you can obtain infinite cobblestone, infinite wood, infinite bones and feathers and pork chops and leather, but misplace one block and you can damn yourself to an empty void for all time. It's high stakes, until, you just reboot the map and try again. The magic of Skyblock, what makes it so engaging, lies in its slower pace. You might be projecting your empire to be onto the void from the get-go, but in order to build any of it, you need to lay the foundation. And to do that, you need a lot of cobblestone or wood. And even though you'll never stop producing those, you can only gather them with slow mining stone tools. Suddenly, every resource you gather is precious. Every move you make is deliberate work that, once it's done, feels like it massively boosted your agenda, even though it only took a nanosecond to complete. It creates this intoxicating one more turn gameplay loop that I only get from playing Civ 5 with the Brave New World expansion pack. The Golden Age covers the most important year and change in Minecraft's development history. Every month, a new patch would bring loads of fresh features, quality of life changes, and bug fixes that geared the game up for its full release. Minecraft was a dynamo, and its unrelenting sense of momentum trickled down to every single user-generated part of its experience, and to its custom maps in particular. With no support for creative mode or builder mode, map makers had to turn to third-party tools. With no support for custom rule sets, map creators just had to write some guidelines on a sign and trust that players would follow them. With no support for in-game dialogue or text pop-ups, creators had to use signs and maps and TXT documents to convey their stories. Without properly functioning ladders, they had to space them apart and then fill in the gaps when the ladders eventually did function properly. And in fact, most of what map makers had to do to tell their stories and design their games was fill in gaps. If Minecraft was a house under construction, missing content and run through with bugs, then the custom map community was building scaffolding around it, strengthening the game and laying down jury-rigged conventions that made it easier for other map makers to play in the space. Custom maps really did capture the rough, ambitious, and truly indie spirit of the Golden Age. And even though we've explored so much of that spirit, I'm still left with a lot of questions. Not for a lack of research, mind you, but for a lack of sources. Like with the maps and screenshots and videos of the pre-alpha era, so much custom map ephemera from the Golden Age has rotted away or been deleted. Who's to say if Light Fox's booster really was the first of its kind? Theirs was just the oldest I could find. I don't know if I'll ever know which custom map pioneered forum scorekeeping, and there's no telling what it was like to play, I don't know, the first version of the Four Towers. Now look, I've harped on the topic of video game preservation so much on this channel that it's starting to feel like self-plagiarization. So I'll leave it at this. Whoever said the internet is forever was a short-sighted dum-dum whose immortal word should be ignored. I forget who said it, and I can't find the post, but as someone once said, a library of Alexandria's worth of internet history is burned every day. You and I might see the value in writing a history of a niche community of a 10-year-old indie game in a formative stage of its development, but the 5 mega corporations who control all our data definitely don't. They see it all as wasted server space that could be taken up by ads or a language learning model. So get an external hard drive and back up all your photos, your memes, your favorite YouTube videos, your old Minecraft maps, really any digital thing that you hold dear, and then get another external hard drive and back everything up onto that one too. And hey, that way, if you're ever feeling nostalgic, you can boot up an old map and walk around your own personal museum of Minecraft's Golden Age.